Greetings, denizens of the internet! You can call me Nitro Indigo, and last year I got back into Animorphs. As I rediscovered my love for the books, I also tried getting into its fanfics for the first time. In particular, I became obsessed with alternate universe fics, AUs for short, and noticed a lot of trends. After seeing a thread about Animorphs what ifs on Reddit, I decided to run an event encouraging people to write short Animorphs AUs, partly so I could find out if these trends were as common as I thought they were, and partly to draw attention to a young site called Offprint. For those of you out of the know, an AU is a fanfic that deliberately changes something from canon. It could be as minor as a character's gender, or as major as the fundamental rules of the setting. Most of these entries fall somewhere in the middle. Before I started the event, I came up with a list of 5 topics that I believed would be common in entries. Unfortunately, it was a hassle getting people to join Offprint, and the Animorphs fandom isn't that big to begin with, so I only got 4 entries. That's not enough to do a statistical analysis, but there's still a surprising amount of variety, so let me review them in chronological order. First of all, there's Where the Truth Lies by Torren. This is by far my favourite entry, and also the most unusual. It's written as a script, as in an actual script, not a chat room, and none of the Animorphs appear, so it took me a while to get invested. The premise is that the Animorphs lost, but the Yeerk invasion was exposed when the Paul ship fell to Earth. 1 year later, 2 mysterious teenagers are arrested for trespassing at the construction site and are taken to Zone 91 for interrogation. First of all, I like how it gradually drip feeds information. The Animorphs, or shapeshifters as they've come to be known, are considered terrifyingly ruthless, almost mythical figures, and everyone still thinks they're Andalites. The teenagers also seem to know more about aliens than they're letting on to. In order to properly analyse this, though, I need to spoil the ending, so skip to this timestamp if you want to avoid that. So it turns out that the 2 mysterious teenagers were Tom and Melissa, and they're working together with David to save the Animorphs. You'll be hard pressed to find a long-form AU where those first 2 aren't major players, yet you rarely see them in canon compliant fics. So why is that? I think it's because their canon roles are rigid, but their personal connections to the Animorphs make them compelling, and they have just enough characterisation to work with. Melissa is the only one of the Animorphs' classmates to get any development, and in the second book of the series no less, she used to be friends with Rachel and has an incredibly emotional scene where she thinks her parents don't love her anymore. She needs to be kept in the dark for her own safety though, so she only makes a few cameos throughout the rest of the series. However, many fans think she should have joined the Animorphs because she has a personal reason to fight the Yeerks. She's already lost her immediate family to them, a possibility which haunts the Animorphs throughout the entire series. Tom, meanwhile, straddles the line between a major and minor character. His presence is very important. He's the crux of Jake's arc and mentioned in almost every book, but as far as his function in the narrative goes, he might as well be an article of clothing. He appears uninfested a grand total of once, has no more than 3 lines of his own, and his name is used to refer to his Yeerks more often than himself. He's an object of tragedy. His death is sad because of what it means to Jake, not because we got to know him in his own right, which is fine. It works for the story K.A. Applegate wanted to tell, but this is fanfiction and we can do what we want. It's hard not to feel sorry for Tom, so freeing him is an easy way to give the series a happier ending. These aren't the only rigid characters who are popular in AUs. Lauren doesn't show up in the main series until the final arc, by which point she's a blind amnesiac, but many fanfics reunite her with Tobias much sooner. Aftran fucks off to become a whale in her second appearance, but in many AUs, she stays in the Yeerk peace movement and helps the Animorphs for longer. But back to Where the Truth Lies, partnering Tom and Melissa with David is an interesting choice. Unlike these other rigid characters, he has a conclusive arc, shall we say, but this is surprisingly the first fanfic I've ever read where he has good intentions. It makes sense here. This universe diverged from canon when Tom's Yeerk figured out that David had the morphing cube, before the latter even met the Animorphs, but considering how many people see David as a victim of circumstance, you'd think it'd be more common. It also has the most open ending of all the entries. I'd love to see what happens next. Next up is Cassie's Christmas Party by Adam2810, also known on YouTube as Animorphs Reviews. It's hilarious, and the reading on his channel is even funnier, but to be honest, I have the least to say about this one. It's a crack fic. It doesn't have a high concept this specific thing is different premise you'd associate with AUs, but it is a series of events that don't gel with canon, so it fits. Animorphs Danganronpa AU by Curlygirl0896 is about, well, take a guess. It's what TV Tropes calls a transplanted character fic, where the cast of one story are placed into the events of another. My knowledge of Danganronpa pretty much begins and ends with Follow-Rose Bridge series that I watched 1 episode of years ago, but I had a sneaking suspicion that this was a beat-for-beat incomplete retelling of the beginning of the first game, which Tessellating Hexagons confirmed. Still, this story was mostly exposition, so I was able to follow it just fine. Long story short, the premise of Danganronpa is that a bunch of teenagers are trapped in a school and aren't allowed to leave unless they can get away with murder. While I found the actual plot structure underwhelming, I like the way the characters are written. It's a nice touch that the fic begins with Jake casually talking about his surname, since that was a big reveal in canon. He's also perfectly in character, stubbornly challenging authority figures and becoming a leader even though he thinks he's nothing special. Tom is a prominent character in this, and his snarky, observer-to-weirdness personality reminds me of aloophorophobia, which is always a plus. And finally, there's Greyhound by Meatball. The premise is that James survived the war and now lives a quiet life. One day, he meets a girl named Marion on the bus, who dated Marco at the start of number 25, The Extreme. The auxiliary Animorphs are a whole group of popular rigid characters. Having at least some of them survive is common in AUs, since a lot of fans took issue with how a bunch of disabled kids were killed off in one go and then forgotten about. Greyhound doesn't have much of a plot, so it's hard for me to evaluate it as an AU, it's more about character interactions. First of all, I really like James's narration. With the way he compares himself to superheroes and tells the readers he has a lot of secrets, it would fit right into canon. Second of all, James and Marion have an interesting dynamic. Both of them know the Animorphs beyond their public images, but for different reasons. He was fighting with them on the front lines, while she knew them as classmates first. They're contrasted in other ways too. James can't relate to any of Marion's childhood anecdotes because he was basically raised in a hospital. The story concludes when an emergency forces James to reveal to Marion that he's an Animorph, and while the circumstances are kind of rushed, it's a fitting note to end it on. I'm planning to do more fanfic reviewing videos in the future, so if you're interested in seeing that, please let me know. Until next time, stay interesting!